Hello guys, and welcome back to my channel. I hope that you're doing well whenever this video reaches you. In tonight's video, I'll be reading you an original short story called The Witch's Stew. It's a little slice of life fantasy that I thought made for a fitting first original story here on this channel. And I'm very excited to share it with you guys. So, without further ado, I hope you enjoy. The cauldron is the principal symbol of the witch. This was officially voted for in the late 90s, when the National Grand Coven of Witches decided that they had really ought to get that sort of thing in order, in preparation for a new millennium of modernised witchcraft, with the cauldron narrowly beating out the pointy hat and the broomstick. The black cat came in at a distant fourth. After all, lots of people have black cats. What most people would not guess is that witches do not in fact use cauldrons primarily for witchcraft. Truth be told, it's not every day that a witch has to brew a potion, so on most days cauldrons are simply used for cooking. The occasional potions brewed therein do confer some benefits to a witch's cooking, however, just as woks used in East Asian cuisine develop a layer of accumulated oil and seasoning that gives flavour, or wok hai, to future dishes, so too do cauldrons develop a patina of potion particulates over time, a breath of the cauldron, so to speak. In a young cauldron, this does little more than impart extra flavour to dishes. The flavour of calcified magical residue combined with salt and oil tastes remarkably similar to MSG. In aged cauldrons, it can heighten magical ability, bring long life, and even cause the dishes upon which the imparted food is served to levitate a few inches off the table. In a witch's cottage on the outskirts of an English town on the road to the sea, a very old cauldron indeed, passed from mother to daughter for a dozen generations, stood in the hearth of a dawn-lit dining room. Its owner had been making more than dinner in it last night, and its bowl was still smoking and crackling with coloured sparks as the sun rose. In the bedroom above, a witch stirred with a groan. Vantesca Thistlewick felt as if she'd been run over by a steamroller. She stretched and pushed herself into a sitting position, causing a few joints to pop disconcertingly. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the disordered scene of her bedroom. The shards of shattered charms and trinkets covered the floor, glowing beads lodged between the floorboards. A bookshelf lay toppled across the centre of the room, surrounded by books and loose leaves of parchment, like a parent struck down and surrounded by their grieving offspring. Everything lay as it had last night when she had collapsed, exhausted, into bed. The battle had nearly broken her. But, despite the wreckage, everything seemed still and calm. Motes of dust hung lazily in the morning light. Outside, the birds had taken up their dawn chorus. The newly dawned day paid no mind to the fact that she had spent the previous night battling Karkovax, the sculptor of tumours. A shadow dropped soundlessly from the ceiling, and she felt something soft brush against her elbow. It was her cat, Void. Of course, Void was not really a cat, just a mass of impenetrable blackness that had chosen to take on the approximate size, shape, and texture of one. Vantesca scritched at the blackness. It meowed contentedly. The young witch rose from her bed and changed out of the battle-worn clothes that she had slept in, and into a thick, sable dressing gown. She winced as she pulled her arms through the sleeves. Every bone in her body felt like it was on fire, and she had a headache almost as bad as the one she'd had after last year's winter solstice. That headache had been the result of copious quantities of elf wine. This one, the result of Karkovax's final counterspell. It went to show just how powerful a demon he was, that he could contend with the might of Oberonian grapes. As Vantesca dressed, Void meowed in protest of the cessation of scritches. Eventually he gave a last disgruntled meow and leapt back up to his den. The cat/black mass slept in a hammock. that hung above Vantesca's bed. From the hammock, threads of multicoloured yarn crisscrossed the ceiling, suspended by metal hooks, leading into little holes and crevices in the wall. Vantesca checked each thread cautiously. They hung slack in the air. It was when they were taut, when they vibrated like a thread in a spider's web. That was when you knew something big was lurking in the border realm between worlds. Last night, every single thread had been thrumming like the devil's guitar. She held a finger to a bright red strand of yarn and closed her eyes, concentrating. All was still. She could not sense so much as a sprite moving through the border realms, except there, the slightest vibration, something huge but far away, her foe licking his wounds in the nether. She should do the same. She looked about the ruin of her bedroom. She knew the rest of the house would look little better. It would take days of hard labour to get things back to the way they were. But not today. She made breakfast non-magically. Usually she would snap her fingers and speak a word of flame to light the hob. Today even that seemed a terrible effort. She was forced to root around in the cupboard for matches. She took her breakfast in the garden, poached eggs on toast, a bowl of porridge and a mug of steaming hot builder's brew. Vantesca had over 24 varieties of tea in her cupboards. Teas to bring sleep, teas to fire the blood, teas to make men sing and dogs dance, teas to let her see the gods, teas to get her high as a kite. Yet she had never found anything better than a mug of Yorkshire first thing in the morning. The herb garden lay untouched by the tumult of the previous night. So there she sat on the bench by the door, drinking in the scents of tea and sage and lavender, and the sound of lazily buzzing bees. She closed her eyes and let the hot steam seep into her bones and leach away at her hurts. Boyd curled up in the grass by her feet, sunlight sliding off his form like oil off water. When her breakfast was finished, the aching in her bones had lessened. After breakfast, Vantesca circled the cottage inside and out, ensuring that the defensive spells that had not been broken last night remained in place. The defences on her bedroom had been shattered, and she had not the strength to recast them. But perhaps the gap could be used to her advantage. She made some preparations. When she was finished, she took her satchel and her book and set off into the hills behind her house. Each step was painful, but she marched on, soon reaching the eaves of the wood that cloaked the hill's upper slopes. Looking back, she could see the entire valley stretched out before her, the meadows peppered with wildflowers, the glinting river snaking its way through the valley floor. Her own cottage, halfway down the hill, shrunk to the size of a dollhouse. Last night seemed so distant in the golden light, the flashes of flame and the gnashing of teeth, a fading nightmare, blown away by the morning breeze. It was cool and dark beneath the trees, and every sound was muffled by the blanket of leaves above and the spongy bed of mulch below. Vantesca lost track of time as she roamed far amongst the hills. Every so often Void's black shape would flit by, and it warmed her to know that he was close, but for the most part he kept his distance. He was on his own quest, in search of birds to eat. After a time, she reached a favourite spot, a gentle slope where the trees gave way to make space for the ruins of a crumbling chapel. A small brook, younger than the chapel, ran through the ruins and cascaded over a stone staircase that led to the remnant arch of an entryway. The stairs had grown thick with algae, each step worn in the middle by the fierce little stream's course. Vantesca sat with her back against a piece of wall and read her book. She read 3 chapters before she looked up to see that the sun had wheeled past its peak. She noticed that her headache had faded too. On her walk back, Vantesca's stomach began to growl fiercely, and her mind turned towards thoughts of a filling late lunch. Her cottage was not too far from the village, and even within the jurisdiction of the delivery drivers. A greasy pizza or a Chinese that should responsibly be consumed by no less than 4 people would not have gone amiss. But there was a certain expectation, even amongst the modern witch, to cook from the land, and today that felt right. The valley was bursting with food if you knew where to look. By the mouldering walls of the chapel she found a bunch of wild spring onions, and there were dandelions in the grass. Back beneath the trees she spied a cluster of fat, meaty mushrooms nestled in between the roots of an oak. She knew they were edible at a glance. Like all witches, Vantesca was an expert in fungal identification, although it was not always strictly necessary, as witches were immune to virtually all poisonous mushrooms. As she was gathering the mushrooms, she heard a rustling in the grass, and then a gentle cooing. It was a pigeon foraging for worms. Vantesca felt strong enough to risk a spell. She uttered a beckoning word, and for a moment the sun seemed not to shine, as the creature's simple little soul came to her like a moth to an old coat, its life snuffed out in a moment. As she marched through the undergrowth to collect it, Void jumped from a tree branch. "Oi!" Vantesca snatched the fowl away just in time. "This one's mine. I bet you've already had loads of mice." Void gave a meow that surely meant maybe one or two, and conceded the prize. It was mid-afternoon by the time Witch and Cat returned to their cottage, a pigeon in one hand, her satchel stuffed with mushrooms and wild herbs. She hung the pigeon in the larder and took out another that had been hung for 2 days. Then she set to preparing her mise en place as best she could in the mess of overturned chairs, dislodged drawers and scattered cutlery. A retro AM radio sat on the counter. She fiddled with the dials until her favourite channel, smooth jazz classics, crackled into life, and she got to work. She separated the spring onion bulbs and stalks, chopping the former, saving the latter for garnish. She sliced the mushrooms, so thick and meaty it was like chopping steaks. She rolled the herbs like cigars, then cut them to fine shreds, releasing their sweet pungency into the kitchen. She butchered the pigeon with the precision of, well, a butcher, dividing leg and wing, breast and bone. The cauldron was still smoking faintly from last night as she filled it with water. The magical residue on the bottom formed a slick of multicolored oils on the surface. She stooped and uttered a word, and the wood chips below the cauldron sparked into flame. The water quickly began to bubble. She was glad she had chosen to cook today. How easy it would have been to collapse onto the sofa and wait for a takeaway. But this, bustling about the kitchen as jazz washed over her, was nourishment for the soul as well as body. She added the meat and veg, brought the whole thing to a boil, and let it simmer for over an hour. She did allow herself a few cookies from the pantry to tide herself over while she waited. She seasoned at intervals, building layers of flavour as her mother had taught her, and her grandmother had taught her mother. Halfway through she decided it was lacking, and added a handful of dried toads for a hit of umami. Perfect. As the smell intensified, it drew Void's curiosity. The not-quite cat leapt up onto her shoulder and purred contentedly. Or rather, the shadow dimension from which Void's body was formed vibrated inexplicably in a way that coincidentally sounded and felt much like a cat purring. By the time Vantesca ladled out the first portion, she was starving. She brought the bowl up to her lips and slurped it right there at the kitchen counter. She let out a deep sigh. The dried frogs had been the right choice. Void meowed questioningly at her from the floor. She scooped out a chunk of pigeon and chucked it at him. It vanished into his black form. Vantesca took another mouthful of soup and realised that the pain of last night's battle had completely vanished. Then, a loud thrumming came from above. Every thread of yarn in the house was vibrating furiously. Then, from the ceiling came the sound of splintering wood and crunching stone, and wet, fleshy sounds accompanied with a wafting stench of sulphur, drifting down the stairwell. Karkovacs had returned. Vantesca cocked an ear as she scooped up the last spoonful of stew, making sure to thoroughly scrape the sides. Good soup. Further crashing came from upstairs. Karkovax had forced entry into her bedroom, where the defensive spells were broken, just as Vantesca had known he would. And she had made preparations. Her meal finished, the young witch rushed upstairs, brandishing her wooden soup spoon, for she had left her wand in her bedside table. The demon turned, leering to face her as they entered. Its hulking mass took up half the room. One cankerous foot was caught in the fangs of a steel bear trap. Not enough to truly hurt the demon, but enough of a distraction for Vantesca to deliver the first strike. Her soup spoon crackled with energy as she brought it down with a flourish. Her first spell smacked into the demon's bulbous torso, searing flesh and eliciting a wicked howl. Karkovax's counterspell was a rocket of blistering hellfire. Vantesca responded with a wall of ice, then launched a volley of firebolts. Two found their mark. The third, Karkovax battered away like a fly before launching a riposte that caught her off balance and brought her to one knee. Her spoon was beginning to crack and smoke. Her eyes went to her bedside table. If she could just reach her wand, but an 8-foot demon stood in her way. She circled to the left, leading her foe on a merry dance around her room, here pushing the attack, forcing Karkovax to concede an inch of ground at a time, there darting back into a defensive position. The two combatants now stood across from the bed from one another. The bedside table stood on the demon's side. Vantesca launched one final spell as the spoon cracked in half in a burst of sparks. The spell found its mark, not Karkovax, but the bedside table, which exploded into splinters, sending her wand flying into the air in a wide arc. She caught it, but too slow. Karkovax had sent a bolt of crackling energy straight towards her. She braced for disintegration. A shadow leapt in front of her. Void. The bolt vanished into the darkness of the not-cat's being, like the chunk of stewed pigeon had before it. Within, it careened across an endless entropic cosmos, streaking the skies of ancient worlds with light for the first time in eons. Void landed soundlessly on the floor and meowed. Karkovax blinked. Vantesca brought her wand down in a wide, sweeping arc that sent Karkovax's head tumbling to the floor. Vantesca collapsed from exhaustion and relief. Void crept up to her and coiled into her lap. She scratched at its knot fur. Good kitty. The bedroom was strewn with wood and brick and still stunk of sulphur. She was definitely ordering a Chinese later. I hope that you guys enjoyed tonight's little story. If you did, I'd really appreciate if you could give this video a like and comment on the parts that you liked, or indeed the parts that you didn't. My journey as a writer is still new, and I welcome all constructive feedback. Please subscribe if you'd like to hear more of my stories. And with that, I hope you have a great day or night, and I'll see you in the next video.